Alright, so find box 3. And on box 3, you may not have done 2A and 2B. That's fine. If you went straight to box 3 from 2A and 2B, that's fine. So we're going to talk about how to tell between irrational and irrational. That's the main thing you need to know for 8th grade. So fill in the boxes as we go along, and I'll tell you what to do and how to figure this out. So irrational numbers, there's tons of them. You have whole numbers, integers, fractions, mixed numbers, decimals, terminating decimals. Remember, terminating decimals stop. Repeating decimals, negative numbers, negative fractions. Remember, fractions not an integer, so 3/4 is not an integer. Negative 3/4 is not an integer. Negative 8 is. What else can we have here? We can have decimals with a whole number in front, and a lot of numbers go over here. Now, this is an important one, so pay attention. If you take the square root of a perfect square, the square root of 16 is really 4. And since 4 is a whole number, that is rational. So these are all rational numbers in this box. Make sure you copy those down in the rational box and try to come up with a couple of your own if you can. If you need to pause it, go ahead and make sure you do that. Alright, so if you finish copying all the rational down, let's look at irrational. Irrational, there's 3 types. The first type is a constant. Now, the only constant we know that's irrational is pi. Now, why is pi irrational? Because it's 3.14, and as you probably learned, you should have learned before, this number keeps on going and never ever stops, and it never repeats, so we cannot write it as a fraction. That's the first type of irrational. The second type of irrational is a pattern decimal. Alright, a pattern decimal starts off like this: 0.1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, and 3 dots means it keeps on going. As you can see, this isn't going to repeat because the 2's, first is 1, 2, then there's 2 2's, and then there's 3 2's. So the pattern decimal is never going to repeat. It's just going to keep on going, and you can't write that as a fraction either. So that's the second type. The third type is a square root again, and it's a square root of a number that's not a perfect square. So for instance, if you take the square root of 3, and for right now you can use a calculator, when you put that in your calculator, you would get 1.7320508. It just keeps going. And if your calculator screened in the end, it would just keep going. It would never repeat. It would never ever stop. So that's your third type of irrational. Alright, so let's review. We have a constant. The only one you know so far is pi. There are other ones, but we won't get into that until later. Pattern decimals, that the digits grow. So first there's 1, 2, and then there's 2 2's, and then 3. And square roots that are not perfect squares. So copy that down all in the box. Now there's one exception that might be called irrational. I'm going to put a star here because I don't really agree with this, but sometimes you'll see this. You'll see 1.234. You'll see a decimal with dots after it, which means it's keep going. And another one would be like 0.487. Now, you can't really tell what's happening, and some people call these irrational. So if you see something like that come up, we'll call it irrational. But I don't always agree with that. We'll discuss that later. But make sure you copy that. Everything on the irrational side. Pattern decimals, pi, and the square root of 3. Alright, so if you need to rewind, of course, or pause it, Or if you don't understand anything, let me know. Now, the thing we need to do here is, how do we tell rational, irrational apart? Well, there's tons of rational numbers, and there's only 3 types of irrational, not including the one with a star. We won't count that for right now. So, this is what I need you to do. On any test, what you want to do is look for the irrationals. Alright? So, you're going to write this down in box 4, right below box 3. Alright, so what you do to find irrationals is look for your irrationals. The irrationals are your pi. It's either going to be, get my pen turned on here with the color. Irrationals are pi, any square root, where you get a decimal, a long decimal, like square root of 18. We know that's not a perfect square. That's going to give us, when we put it in our calculator, you're going to get 4.2426068, and it just keeps going. And of course, if you calculate it, and that one in. So that's the second type. And the third type is your pattern decimals. Alright, so what you do in a pattern decimals, of course, we said are 0.02002, and 3 zeros, 2, and it just keeps growing. So what you want to do when you're trying to figure out if something's rational or irrational, check these 3 things. Is it pi? Is it a pattern decimal? Sorry. Not a pattern. Is it square root of something that's not a perfect square or a pattern decimal? Sorry. So if it's one of those 3 things, then it's rational. Irrational. So one of these 3 things is irrational. Everything else is rational. Everything else is rational. So, get all this copied in box 4. Pause it if you need to, and then I'll continue with just 1 or 2 examples. Alright, so let's write down these 2 examples. Let's try the square root of 121. So the square root of 121 is 11. And we want to know, is that rational or irrational? So, what do you think? Alright, that the square root of 121 is 11, which is a whole number, so it's rational. So copy that down in box 4A. If you need to pause it, go ahead. Let's look at 4B. 4B will be the square root of 79. Well, all you have to do is type that in your calculator. And when you type it in, you'll see this long decimal, 8.888194417. It just keeps going. So you see no evidence of it repeating. We know square roots of numbers. That's not a perfect square. So that's going to be irrational. So make sure you copy that down in 4B. Alright, so once you finish getting these notes down, again, pause it if you need it. Rewind if you need to. Once you get these notes down, you're going to press submit. Once you go to the next page, you watch a short video, then press submit, and then there's going to be a link. Click on that link, and you're going to answer some questions, whether some numbers are rational or irrational. If you have any problems, raise your hand and call me over. You're going to answer those questions on a separate piece of notebook paper. And if you need help, again, let me know. It's going to be on a separate piece of notebook paper. It'll be the next page in your notebook.